What up, homie?
Hey man, how are you?
All right, all right. How you
Uh,
doing?
Good. I finally caught up on some sleep, but I
I
don't know
hear
if you.
I
I'm sure.
hear that, man.
I'm sure you guys are crazy busy.
Actually, this week I've been trying to catch up on sleep as well.
And today we have Ryan Shimabukuro. He's the sprint team head coach for US long track speed skating. So, hi Ryan, how are you doing?
I'm good, Eric, man.
Yeah,
Good to be on here. Thanks for having me.
yeah. You're actually the first person. This was all planned for COVID or before COVID, and just got all messed up. I was just with Ryan in Canada, and the conversations are always so interesting with you and the whole team. And I just thank you for being the first person. And we're about 7 weeks out from the Olympics. So, for people who don't know, Coach Ryan, Rye Guy, he's one of the nicest people I've ever met in sport. He's always treated me well. And when I was living in Salt Lake, with short track. We have interaction with long track, but it's not, it's the same family, but it's two different programs. I don't know if that's accurate, but to me, it was a whole different world, whole different sport. But we're in the same space, training and spending time, but they're on two different World Cup tours. So it's not like we're competing side by side, other than at the Olympic Games. And you were always one of the nicest people with me. And I think when we sat down to eat last week, I had this assumption that you've been with US Speedskating the whole time, and you had told me about your working with other programs, and um, your history's out there. People kind of know who you are, but the first thing that caught my attention was you grew up in Hawaii. You're a speed skater on ice, and I made the assumption you were on inline or on dry land, like most of our skaters are, or many of the skaters are. Can you explain that? Ice was available. You said there was a rink in Hawaii and you got into it. Can you just explain your history with the sport?
Yeah. First off, yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm honored, and we go back over a decade now before Vancouver. So,
Yep.
but yeah, you're right. Short track and long track, we're under the same roof, but two different programs, two different teams, and actually three teams because long track is split up between sprint and long distance, and then you have short track. So, how I got started in speed skating, I was actually 6 years old, and the 1980 Winter Olympics was on TV, and my dad was watching the coverage, and one of Eric Heiden's races came on. And it's not like I sat down and watched all of his races, but I just thought it looked really cool, the gold suit skating fast on the ice. And it had to be one of his sprint races because I remember it being a fast race. And so from there, I mean, I kind of forgot about it. I'm 6 years old. And then a few years later, the Ice Palace opened up near my home, but I didn't, and they opened up in 1982, but it wasn't until about 1984, 85 that I remembered speed skating because I saw pictures of speed skaters in a study book for school doing dry land exercises. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember Eric Heiden. And then some of my friends started skating for fun, and they always try to get me to do it, but for whatever reason, I was just afraid of going and skating. And then one day, one of our family friends was having a birthday party at a Chuck E. Cheese, and then they decided, oh, let's go ice skating. So I'm like, well, I guess I'm roped in. I was in the seventh grade. So what is that? 12, 13 years old. And was on the ice for about 2 hours, only fell once and fell in love with it right away. So started skating with friends every weekend. And then about 6 months later, I bought a pair of hockey skates with my paper route money and enrolled in the speed skating class, which was 1 hour a week. And then you supplemented your ice time during the public sessions, either on Friday and or Saturdays. So didn't have speed skates, didn't even know what the proper apparel was. We were just in street clothes. And, after every resurface, they would put out four cones and you could speed skate, to one song. Usually it was like Danger Zone from Top Gun or Jump from Van Halen. But yeah, it started there. And then I was saving up my paper route money to go to the ISIA Nationals, which back then I thought was the real Nationals, but come to find out later, it was just a developmental thing. And I was at a meeting with our club coach for the team from Hawaii that was going to go to the ISI Nationals, And at the end of the meeting, she pulled me aside with my parents. She's like, "Hey, I got a call from one of the secretaries of the Speed Skating Association on the mainland, and they're having a training camp this summer in Marquette, Michigan. And they were wondering if anyone from Hawaii was interested, if there was any speed skaters that were interested." And my first reaction immediately was nope. I've been working to go to ISI nationals. I think I can win and this and that. No, thank you. And then the coach said, okay, whatever. And my parents started asking questions, but on the way home, I was like, nope, I want to go to nationals. My dad, when we got home, he sat me down. He's like, I know you've been working hard for this competition, but this training camp sounds like it'd be a better use of your time and money, and you'd get a lot more out of it than just going to this one competition.
Hmm.
And I fought him at first, but then in the end, long story short, it made sense. So I called up the coach and I said, I'm interested. Can we get the information? Long story short, 5 6 months later, I got arranged to fly out from Honolulu to Los Angeles and stay with Jerry Search for a couple of nights because he was going to go to the camp as well. And the secretary put me in touch with him. So stayed at his house. He fitted me with a pair of used short track speed skates that was custom molded for somebody else, taught me how to sharpen skates, did a little video session, and then we went to a club, the Mora Ice Club session at Paramount Ice Rink in LA later that night. And I'd only been on rental figure skates before and hockey skates. I'd never been on speed skates before. I never knew the blades were different, so I'm squeaking all over the place because there's no hollow in the blade, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just squeaking all over the place. But by the end of the session, I was able to balance better and skate around. And the next morning, we're flying up to Marquette, Michigan. I was way in over my head. The camp had anywhere from like 10-year-olds up to Olympic team members. I mean, this is 6 months before the Calgary Olympics in '88, and
Huh.
there were several skaters there that were both on the short track and long track Olympic team that would make the Olympic team.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I mean, I learned really quick. I'd never done dry land training before. Never done anything off ice, and the stuff that we did do on ice paled into comparison what we were doing on the ice. So I was starting off from square one. And the head coach of that camp was Diane Holum, who was a Olympic gold medalist herself from the U.S. She was Eric Heiden's coach. She was a three-time Olympic team coach. Um,
Yeah.
and then the ice coach was two-time world champion Guy Daniel from Canada. And so again, I'm in over my head. I'm a sponge taking everything in. I'm so sore from the training. I've never really traveled extensively, so the 7 hour time change is kicking my butt.
Were you wearing
Um,
shorts like you usually do?
oh yeah, I
No.
mean, it's August in Michigan, so it's hot.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
hot, so and humid.
Sure.
But anyway, Jerry Search had filmed every ice workout, every dry land workout, every classroom lecture.
Yeah.
So I proceeded to buy a copy of of his VHS tapes, and I still have them. Uh,
Wow.
30 something
Wow.
years later. And that became my coach when I went home, and I would stay in touch with Jerry over telephone, and he would send me programs in the mail. This
Mhm.
is obviously before email, way before email, so it's all snail mail stuff. And so with only having 1 hour of ice for speed skating actually a week, and then supplementing ice time with public sessions,
Yeah.
the majority of the time I was doing training off ice. My dad had built me a slide board. I bought a weight set. I bought a road bike, and I would go across the street to a park across the street from our condo and do dryland training. And I just kind of set up a program based off of what I learned at the camp, and did that for a whole year until I went up to the camp the following year. And they saw I had made a lot of improvement on my own,
Yeah.
and eventually I got an invite into the short track program in Marquette in November of '98, and in January of '89 I was on a flight from Honolulu up to Marquette, Michigan. I always wanted to skate long track though. I mean, obviously I only
Because
could
of
skate.
Haydn, because of his
Yeah, yeah.
success.
Well, not only that, but like, for me is it was more like I've never been into team sports. I always felt like, skating short track in a way, like you leave your performance in other people's hands, whether it's somebody making a dumb pass on you and taking you out, or getting a bad call from a referee.
Yeah.
Whereas long track, the clock doesn't lie. If you had a good race or a bad race. So that really appealed to me more. But growing up in Hawaii, there was no opportunity to skate long track. So I
Yep.
did I did pretty well my first year. In Marquette. I got third at nationals in my first national championships in the junior division. I just missed making the junior national team by a
Mhm.
1 point. I won a couple of local competitions in Illinois. So it was a great experience, but I always wanted to skate long track. So during that season, I had decided to move to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where there was a big developmental area, and that was the base of long track at the time in the country. It still is. It's still
That's that's one of the two tracks in the U.S. is
one of the two indoor tracks.
indoor tracks.
There's also a track in Lake Placid that's being renovated. There's a outdoor track in Roseville, Minnesota, and also
Okay.
in Butte, Montana. So, but yeah, it's one of the two indoor tracks. And before I became indoor, I mean, I had moved there when it was outdoor.
Yeah.
So I grew up
Wow.
skating outdoor and long track. But yeah, so I had moved there in the summer of 1989, and I skated until 1998. Skated three Olympic trials. In 1998, finished seventh in the thousand, and decided to retire after that. And I was actually going to just move home to Hawaii and enroll in school and just live a normal life. But then a couple of skaters approached me about coaching them privately until I moved back home in the spring. And then within a month, I had 10 full time skaters. So I thought, oh, maybe this is something I can do professionally.
Yep.
And so I changed my plans, and I had a group for the rest of that season. And then in the spring of 1998, US Speedskating approached me about potentially becoming the regional program coach, the Midwest regional program coach there, since after every Olympics, as you know, there's a shuffle in staffing, and some coaching turnover. And come to find out, my coach was being promoted to the sprint team national program, so they needed somebody to replace him.
Oh,
So I was one of the candidates, and then I signed my contract in July of 1998 with US Speed Skating, and was the regional program coach. And the next year took on the additional responsibilities of the junior national team with Tom Cushman, who was the northern regional coach in Minnesota. Did that through 2002, and then after that, in 2002, was promoted to the national sprint team coach. And
you so
that's
you missed the Lillehammer team, but in Nagano you were. It looked like you were going, but you got pneumonia. Is that right?
Yeah, so like in '94, I didn't have a legitimate chance of making that team.
Okay.
That was my second in my first Olympic trials in '92. I was a junior still. I was just using the Olympic trials as a tune-up
Experience.
for the junior world championship team
Sure.
trials. In '94, I was probably top 10, 15 around there.
Yep.
But you had a lot, because it was only a 2-year turnaround instead of a 4-year turnaround after Albertville. You had a lot of the veterans stick around for '94. So I knew my chances were slim to none. And then '98, um, I had a rocky 4 years. I was getting sick a lot. I had always had health problems. I was born with collapsed lungs, and so I always
Huh.
battled pneumonia and bronchitis through my career. And in '98, the first weekend, and back then Olympic trials were done over 2 weekends. And the first weekend I had skated PBs in the thousand. I was on the bubble, and I had one more chance the second weekend to skate a faster time to get into the top four. And I was feeling good. Confidence was on an all-time high, but I got pneumonia on that Monday night in between, and I knew how that illness affected me. And
Yeah.
so I pretty much, when I got off the phone with the doctor, I kind of just laid in bed, and I decided right then and there that that was the end of my skating career, because I c- I was young enough to go another 4 years, but I couldn't expect my family and friends and my supporters in Hawaii that had donated a lot of emotional energy and time and finances to support me another 4 years. So I had decided to make my peace with it. And uh, I ended my career skating my
Mhm.
fastest times I ever did. So,
Yeah.
when I look back, it wasn't the way I wanted to end, but I had nothing to regret.
With COVID happening now, and Beijing's going to be a really secure bubble, and we up in Canada, I mean, the hotel, the rink, the bus, we were in a bubble and tested with your pneumonia experience. I mean, now's an important time for the athletes to be safe, whether it's speed skating or any athlete. Does that experience that you have play into now as a leader of the team, where it's like if someone's sick for a week or two, it could really mess up the next 7 weeks, I assume, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
for me, when I skated, if I got bronchitis or pneumonia, it it took a while to recover from that. I lost a
yeah,
lot of fitness because the energy that it just consumed out of me. It took a while to recover. So, with COVID, I haven't had COVID yet. I've been, vaccinated. I try to be safe just like everybody else on the team because right now, more than ever, you got to be very vigilant in being hygienically, conscious because if you get COVID, there's a good chance you're not going to the games, period, staff
yeah,
or athlete. And no
yeah,
one no one wants to take that chance, so the athletes know what's at stake, the staff knows what's at stake, and I'm not taking anything for granted. I mean, you have some people that believe that COVID is fake, whatever, but for me it's like I've known people that have had COVID and it's been serious. They've been knocked down pretty bad. They said for some of them it was the worst experience they ever had. So
but even a mild case would just mess up a week or two of training, and that athlete is not only, I mean, long
well,
track,
even
they have to compete in Olympic trials in a few weeks here,
right. And the
make the
thing is
team,
that
and
the
then go
thing,
to the games.
yeah, exactly. And the thing is this too is like, okay, let's say you test positive or and you're asymptomatic, you have no problems. You're still not going to be allowed to train.
Yeah,
So you're missing out on that time. You're not allowed in the facility. So there's too much at risk. And uh yeah, now's a crucial time. It's kind of dangerous when you got to add travel on top of that. You're coming into another venue with potentially open spectators that are, they're not going to be exposed to the kind of bubble that we're exposed to. So we kind of have to tell the skaters like you guys have to be very careful. A lot of people are probably going to want to see you. They're going to want to, be in close proximity, but you got to make some hard decisions. So during the World Cups, when I would see people and they would fly in or whatever, I'd basically say hi from afar because
yeah,
I just can't take that kind of chance. And
it's huge risk.
yeah, already going into Milwaukee, they have a speed skating alumni, some events set up, and people were asking if I'm going to be there. I said, sorry, no, the staff's
Yep.
going to be in a bubble, and we just can't take that chance. Some people might feel like that's a little bit of overkill, but again, the risk and consequences are too high at this point.
But for you getting pneumonia before Nagano, which is 98, I believe you said,
Yep.
I mean, you can't compete. It's over, or at least the year's over. And yeah, COVID, the bubble is going to be interesting for you guys. And what kind of challenges? I'm always interested, like as much as I know you and we've talked. What is a coach thinking right now? 7 plus or about 7 weeks out, 6 weeks out before the games, and then at the games. What's the goal right now? Obviously, people need to make the team, I assume.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, some athletes will be training through the trials. They're at that level where they don't have to be peaked, where others are going to need to be highly peaked just to make the team. And it's going to be, it's going to be battled out because our spots are going to be limited.
Yep.
So, number one is to keep the athletes healthy. That's first and foremost. Number two is to optimize their training through this next period before we leave for China. And the Olympic trials are emotionally draining. It's one of the hardest competitions I've ever experienced, both as an athlete and as a coach, because just there's so much on the line, and again, it's emotionally draining. So you got to recover from that, and then make sure that you can turn around, get a training block in before we head to Beijing. So, and then in Beijing, as you know, like being in the Olympic Village, it's a viral dome, so you got to be hyper vigilant in staying sanitary and, you know, not making stupid decisions, and that can affect your health. The games this year is going to be a lot different than in the past because
No
basically
family, right?
no family, no family, no friends. Basically, any athlete and staff, you're going to only be regulated to your venue. You're not going to be able to go
Man,
see any other sport live. And that, for us, on the long track side, includes short track. We can't go see them. They can't come see us. And when you're in the village, you're basically only regulated to your building and the cafeteria, from what I've been
man,
told. So,
man.
and they're going to be doing testing every single day, and you may not even get the chance to go to opening or closing ceremony because the arrival and the departure schedules are still yet to be announced. And
D- does yeah? Go ahead.
if it's anything like Tokyo, if you compete and you're finished early in the games, you, I think, have only like 48 hours after you're done, and then you have to leave. You can't stay there to the
Oh
end of the
wow,
games and walk in
wow.
closing ceremonies.
Does
So
USA have separate food? I heard.
we haven't
Right.
seen that yet. I haven't seen any of that that info yet. I know that's something that they discussed, but it's nothing that I've seen that's confirmed. In the past, the US USOC has had a USA house or like a separate cafeteria. Now, if they're gonna have that in Beijing, that's news to me, and I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised if that's gonna be a no-no.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
everything's gonna be a lot more scaled down and condensed.
Um, that's going to be a challenge for the athletes. I remember going to Vancouver and Sochi. One of the most important roles, you know, the trainer's part of the coaching staff, but we're not the coach. We have so much interaction with athletes and just supporting them and
Right.
being advocates. And the physiological changes I've seen in athletes in my short career, say the past 15 years with sport. Um, what have you seen with long track? Because most people don't realize, they assume that speed skating is all done on the ice, all the training's on the ice, and they don't realize how much work goes into dry land. Cycling was something I didn't realize how much occurred in the sport, and a lot of these athletes could be like high level cyclists, it turns out. But what kind of physiological changes have you seen through your career, and is there a big change that's going to happen going into Beijing? I mean, if you guys can't go outside to train, where are you going to get your work done? I don't
Yeah.
know.
So I mean,
Or can you go outside? I guess you don't know all the answers right now, but
right. Like,
yeah,
I mean, to answer the first part of your question, I mean, yeah, we're not on the ice year round because ice is expensive. And so on a 400-meter oval, that's a big monthly bill. It's about $50,000 a month. So obviously we're only on the ice from July until March.
sure,
Um, with that said, we supplement a lot of our lack of ice with other skating type of modalities, whether it's inline, on hockey skates, on short track skates, on a hockey rink or on a short track rink, slide board. We have an inline treadmill, but we also
hmm,
do dry land imitations, as you mentioned, cycling, a lot of weight training, running, sometimes some work in the pool for certain athletes.
yep,
So those are the kind of modalities that we normally go through in the summer and fall. And then typically once the competition season starts, it's skating, weight training, biking or running, and dry land to keep up specific strength. Because you don't maintain specific strength by just skating. You need to do stuff off the
sure.
ice to supplement that.
Obviously, you can limit injury that way, but has that been a big change since when you were competing? Have you seen? We know athletes now are just at the highest level they've ever been, but has that been a big change since when you were competing?
In
Were
terms
you
of
doing
injury,
all those modalities? Were you using all those techniques?
oh yeah, oh
You
yeah.
were okay.
Yeah, that's nothing new. I mean, and that's the thing about speed skating. I mean, you take a lot of what's already been historical and you just modernize it. You try to keep tweaking things a little bit more. Obviously, there's some other things that we've incorporated, within the training, within weight training, within speed work. You got watt bikes, you got the 1080 sprint, timing system, you got
Mhm.
uh gym wear and all that kind of stuff. It just like it takes a little bit more of the guessing out of the training, so to speak. But like the gym where I was talking with Andrew, our strength and conditioning coach, it records the velocity and the time and stuff. Back when I skated, we didn't have that. We had the poor man's version. You had to do a certain amount of reps in a certain amount of seconds with a certain amount of weight, and that's how you calculated if you're doing the right intensity and so forth. So
Hmm.
I think there's a pros and cons to both. Back then, it made the athlete much more internal. You had to feel what you were doing, and you
Okay.
had to really emphasize or get to know what an RPE, a rate of perceived exertion, was. So because you didn't have all this heart rate monitoring. Yeah, we had heart rate monitors, but we didn't have all the, like heart rate monitors these days are at another level, and they measure a lot more than just heart rate and so forth. But
Hmm.
nowadays, it's like a lot of times the athletes rely too much upon the technology and the numbers, and they don't know how to physically tell you how they're feeling. They just go strictly off the numbers. I'm like, well, what happens if the battery on your watch goes out or something happens with the unit and it breaks and you can't internalize and give me feedback? That's a
Yeah.
problem. So there has to be a balance of both. It can't just, to me, be all science and no philosophy, or all philosophy and no science. There's got to be a good balance. So from that end, and then from the recovery mechanism side, there's so many tools out there now to help the athletes recover faster, which, as you know, from the medical side, if they recover faster, they can do more intensive training, which then takes them to another level because they're able to stack their training
Yep.
much more. Whereas in the past, if the recovery modalities were limited, they don't recover as fast. Well, you can't do as much intensive training.
Yep.
So you add those small factors together, and they add up to a big improvement in performance. And as you know, humans are pretty resilient. They learn how to push through barriers and break records, and it's a little at a time from year to
It,
year.
is the athlete physically different? Because you think of Eric Heiden and the big legs. You're big and strong. Are the athletes leaner? Is technology changing? Obviously, the older athletes master their craft better and better every year. But is there a big difference in technology and therefore
Well,
performance?
40 years ago, when, at least in long track, when most, all the racing was outdoors, right? Indoor long track didn't start until 1986.
Yeah.
So you go back, I mean, that's 6 years after Heiden's, after he retired.
Yeah.
But back then, the long track skater was pretty, especially on the men's side, were prototypically big. You had the Germans, the Russians, the Norwegians, and Eric himself, he was huge. A lot of the guys back then were big, and it's just because you had to deal a lot with the weather and the elements. So the
Okay.
bigger, stronger guys had an advantage to push through those elements. Was when it went indoor, it became much more technical. The smaller guys had an equal advantage now, and the technique became equally as important as the physical capacity. Yeah, back when it was outdoors completely, you needed a good technique as well, but
Yeah.
you could overcome a technical deficiency by being physically stronger. But when it went indoor, there was a shift in
Okay.
in the balance. Also, too, like back then, the speeds, you look at it to today compared to back then. Obviously, the speeds are much slower back then,
Yeah.
but nowadays, with the speeds being so hot, so much higher over the last 2 decades or
Yeah.
so, people have trimmed down because you don't want to be carrying around extra body
Yeah.
weight that you don't need at those speeds, and you want to reduce the forces on your body, because the more weight you got to carry around the track, obviously the slower you're going to go automatically. And uh, it's probably easier to create more lactic acid that way, which is a big tolerance that a speed skater has to learn how to, number one, produce, and then learn how to tolerate it.
Yeah. Does like in Calgary and then in Utah, the elevation, the the quality of the ice matters. So indoor just has a completely different quality of ice. So can a lighter skater glide further? Is that, or can everyone glide further? Is there
the glide distance is more in a technical efficiency with the skater, whether it's a bigger guy or smaller guy. So that doesn't have a specific benefit to one size or the other.
Okay.
Where an altitude track like Salt Lake or Calgary or Urumqi in China or Davos in Switzerland, Medeo in Kazakhstan, those are considered high altitude tracks. Butte, Montana, it's over a mile high. Even though it's outdoors, it held the outdoor world records for many years because of the high altitude. So when you're in the high altitude, the major resistance that a speed skater has to overcome is frontal air resistance. It's not the ice friction; it's the frontal air resistance. So if the air that they have to move through is much less, the faster they're going to go. So a higher track will have a natural advantage over a sea level or a low level track just by the air friction alone. I mean,
Okay.
it's 75% of the two frictions. The ice friction is only about 25%.
Huh.
And some scientists back about 20 years ago, some researchers had proven that at competitions, whether it's a sea level or a high altitude track, ice friction really doesn't change provided that the ice is being made equally. So the biggest difference that the skater had to overcome again was the air friction that they're moving through.
Okay. Interesting. Um, yeah, it's always amazing to see the athletes. In my view, visiting you guys last week, I saw you guys about 2.5 years ago in Poland, and man, all the work that they do outside of just skating and how well they take care of themselves. It's amazing just to witness. But are there any other trends? Is there anything else happening in speed skating? I mean, the mass start. That's not a sprint event, correct? Or
Well,
is it?
the master was kind of comes from inline skating, pack style.
Sure.
I shouldn't say it comes from inline. I mean, back in the old days, at least in the US, we had pack style skating.
Yeah.
But it was included in the World Cup, the World Championship, and then eventually the Olympic schedule to draw more countries in that had an inline background. As you know, like long track is more time trial based. You race against the clock, whereas the mass start, even though they have a clock on it, that's just for record keeping purposes. It's
Yeah.
basically the first three across the line that win. You have three intermediate sprints along the way that would help, spots 4 through 8 potentially shift positions based on if they can win some sprint points. But if you're first, second, or third across the line, that's 1, 2, and 3. And that's a little different because you have a mixture of different types of athletes. You have athletes that come from the pure distance side. You have skaters that come from the speed side, middle
Hmm.
distance side, and that have a little bit of endurance. So based on your strengths, you have to play to those strengths, and some athletes, if they don't have any speed, they have to try and break away and get away from the pack because they're not going to win a field sprint at the end.
Hmm.
Versus athletes that only have top end, they have to wait. They can't chase down breaks. They can't, go for the field sprints for the sprint points during the race because maybe, their only chance is to, get with 200 or 2 laps to go, 800 meters to go, they have the speed that is faster than the other guys in the pack, and then they can win at the line. So there's strategies involved. And the hardest thing about a mass start is that no one race is ever the same. It's like
Yeah.
short track, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that can go on. And that's what makes it one of the hardest events to compete in because it's so unpredictable. You get a lot of fan favorites or in races that actually don't do well because of the way it gets played out.
Yeah.
So,
It's very
this
similar to short track that way.
right,
The
right,
finals where people get disqualified was always the hardest thing to watch in short track, where someone took you out, they're disqualified. It was the finals. There's no more racing.
right, right,
You technically came in fifth or
right.
fourth, or whatever, and you didn't win. And long track has that time trial. Your time, it's a different animal. It's neat to see how the personality differences between the sports is interesting. That's why the mass start, I assume, is very popular to watch. I love watching it, but
Yeah, I mean, the mass start definitely brought in a different kind of a skater to the
yeah,
field, because you don't necessarily have to be great at time trialing, but you definitely have to have a certain physiological capacity, and you have to be able to read the pack. You have to be comfortable going 35 plus miles an hour in a tight group around a tight turn.
yeah,
A lot of people that come from inline or whatever, it takes them a little bit because when you talk to them, when they're on wheels, they have no fear because there's no fear of getting cut. But when they're on blades, in the beginning, there's an
yeah.
apprehension that they have to overcome.
And their
And
suits are different. You guys actually have more protection in those races, from what I
yes,
understand.
yeah, I mean they're wearing what they call cut proof, but there's no such thing
Yeah,
as cut proof because you can get punctured with the blade, even though the blade tips are rounded. I've seen people get
yeah.
punctured, and so
Oh man.
through the material. So you can make it as safe as you think you can, but as you know, you work in the medical field, there's no such thing as a proven guarantee. They can only do their best to try to minimize it. But
Yeah,
just like in short track, the spectators want to see some blood and gore. They want to
yeah.
see contact. They want to see
Uh,
guys crashing and going down.
yeah,
Okay,
no one wants to see anyone get hurt, but did you skate on the track that JR in Marquette? That's where JR cut himself in short track. Was
that
that
was
the
that
was
was
that the same rink?
I can't remember if it is. If it
The
was on the
university?
Yeah, if it was on NMU's university,
Yeah.
I heard that they had redone one, but so I'm not sure if it was the exact same one. But we trained on the hockey rink at NMU at Northern Michigan University.
Okay. Well, um, I could go on in questions, but I got a couple more for you. As a spectator, people always, are asking me, they assume these kids grow up on the ice, which isn't fully accurate. There's a lot of inliners from the South.
Right.
You know, how do you tell people to watch the events, to appreciate it more? Because when I see you on TV, when you're showing the times to the skater coming around, I just get so excited. But how would you tell a layperson just what to look for?
Right.
Yeah,
So if you look at the difference between short track and long track, I would say like when you watch short track, you have to appreciate the strategy. And again, that no one race is ever the same. And it's not particularly always the fastest guy that wins. There's so much that is involved. Again, if you get taken out by a guy because you're in a wrong position at the wrong time, you're on the outside making a pass and the guy falls and takes you out, that's just the nature of the sport. Or you get DQ'd, and with their video replay system now, it seems that is a lot less,
hmm,
but it's still a part of it, and you have to accept that. And from the differences in the distances, obviously in short track, 500 up to 1500, and then you got the relays, and now you got the mixed gender relays put in there. There's a
yeah,
lot of strategy that goes that's involved into based on who you're racing in your heat and what their strengths are, what their track patterns are, and how they're going to race against you. In
okay,
long track, the strategies are also different from race to race. Depending on the lane you get, depending on the pair you get,
yeah,
will also dictate a little bit on how you approach the race. And even though a lot of like most of the racing on inlines is in a pack,
yeah,
there's very few that are time trials, and when they're on the shorter side, 300 meters and under. So a lot of times when I get parents or coaches from inline, they're like, "Oh, this is boring." It's like, well, you have to when you watch the distance races, you have to appreciate the fact that the distance racers are going over 30 miles an hour
yep,
with no carrot in front of them. They're able to hold each lap time within a tenth or two lap after lap.
yep,
That's the science of like distance racing, being able to play to your strength and make sure that you can sustain. You're nearly redlining, especially in the men's 5,000 meter, the women's 3K. Those distances, they're nearly redlining
wow,
from the gun, and they got to sustain that for 6 minutes.
wow,
And that's really really intensive. So when you see a distance skater and they're skating a 28-second lap on lap 11 of 12, 3 miles in, That's pretty darn impressive. And then when you look at the shorter distances, 500-meter, obviously that's a full sprint. You're going top end, but you're not really going 100%, because if you go 100%, you can overskate. And if you overskate and you make one slip in a 500-meter, you
It's
could go
over.
from first to 20th.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's where you got to live in that headspace. And then you got the middle distances, right? The 1,000 and 1,500. The 1,500 is the most anaerobic race in the field, and you're basically in oxygen debt for the last 30 seconds of that race. And so
Wow.
people can't imagine, creating over 30 millimoles of lactate in their muscles. So when they see the skaters crawling off the ice because they can't stand, that's not a dramatization. I mean, most
Yeah.
physiologists, most physiologists, they can't fathom what 30 millimoles of lactate feels like.
Wow.
And most track and field runners, swimmers are somewhere between 10 and 12, and that's already at their limit.
Wow.
The closest on to ice is like probably track cycling in the kilometer,
Hmm.
race. They called it the kilometer.
Yep.
So it's very, very muscular. It's very, very heavy. So and you also get what they call the 1,500-meter hack.
Yep.
So when you see skaters later on in the day, maybe 3-4 days down the road, they're still hacking up a lung because their
Yeah.
lungs have shut down from being so anaerobic.
Wow.
So these physiological requirements for racing take years upon years to develop, and so when the inliners come over to the ice, that's something that they have to learn, because the racing that they do is much different, than what we do on the ice. We kind of use the analogy where inlining is a lot less muscular.
Yep.
It's more like cycling. It's more ventilatory. Obviously, you're gonna feel stress in the legs, but it's whereas on ice, every push is like doing a max squat, back squat. It's very
Wow.
heavy. You're creating a lot of lactate. You're creating a lot of pressure. So there's that back and forth that you have to understand between the sports. Even though they look similar, the physiology, the technique, the application of pressure, the timing of the stroke, completely different.
So the 1,500 is the most demanding. Is that the most athletic? It's not a
I would
shot at any other distance. It's just, is it a
I,
most special athlete?
well, I wouldn't say it's a special athlete. They call it the King's race because
Yeah.
that's where speed meets the distance, right? If you can get a distance athlete that has some speed and you got a sprinter that has some endurance,
Yeah.
that's where they meet in the middle. I wouldn't. It's the race that creates the most lactate. Now,
Okay.
some would argue the men's 5,000 is the most demanding,
Yeah.
and just because you're racing at such a high intensity right from the gun.
Yeah.
1,500, you're going probably 99% for a minute 40 seconds. So again, the last 30 seconds of that race, you're working without oxygen.
Wow.
And even in speed skating, I got to remind sprinters that in the realm of speed skating, a 500 meter is not a sprint in terms of physiology. When you talk to physiologists, they like 10, 15 seconds is a
Yeah.
sprint.
Yeah.
Well, our shortest distance is 33 seconds.
Yep.
So that's double the amount, over double the amount. So sprinters have to have a different mindset when they
Sure.
come into it, and to be able to replicate that day to day and then weekend to weekend on multiple weekends. So it's a different kind of preparation. Speed skating tends to break a lot of the physiological rules that you learn in sports science. It follows a lot of the normal, but it
Yep.
also breaks a lot of the traditional.
And that's why experience matters and you have it. And is that what made, we talked about this a little, but Heiden winning those 5 medals. And sorry that I thought he had won 3. I couldn't believe it. But those him winning at every distance, it made him that much more special. I mean, he could just physiologically stand a sprint versus a longer distance,
Well, yeah, I
and
mean,
outdoors, it was,
you got to remember. I mean, a lot of people will like, it's generational, right? To me, Eric will always be the greatest. You know, I mean, no one's ever gonna do what he's ever done, like win every distance at the Olympics. And you got to remember in that 4 year span from 1977 to 1980,
Mhm.
he won, you know, junior world championships, world sprint championships, and world all around championships. You know, he's the
Okay.
only in 1977 he was the only skater to this day that's ever won a junior world title, a world sprint title, and a world all around title in the
Wow.
same year.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
so and he did, you know, he accomplished, you know, all that by the time he was at the age of 21. You know, but what
Yeah.
made, you know, obviously I didn't coach Eric, but having, you know, having had the privilege of calling him a friend and a colleague for 20 plus years now, um, the one thing that you know, Diane always used to say that, you know, he had a, that family was just physically gifted. You know, if you know his sister
His
Beth as
sister.
well, you know,
Yeah.
Beth was a world champion in speed skating and in road cycling. She was an NCAA champion in cross country skiing. Uh, uh, she was an Olympic bronze medalist in speed skating. If you look at that family, like their dad, you know, was very active. Their grandfather played hockey.
Yep.
They had some genetics in them, and a lot of the coaches said like Eric was probably one of the most gifted, talented physiologically that they've ever seen. Eric, if you ask Eric, you know, I remember him speaking to our team one year. He said that what made him strong is that, you know, he could train harder than anybody else, but he also had the mental strength to endure that, what it required. So more so than ever, like it was his mental strength. And Diane Holm would probably agree that it was more so his mental strength that made him special, quote
Okay.
unquote. So he could deal with pain uh, more so than anybody else.
I met him as a child. My parents brought me to watch him cycle at a
Yeah,
race, and oops, and he, you know, he's just amazing, and it's neat that he's so close to the program. I know he lives up in, I believe, Park City, and he's a physician, and
right.
but have his have him close to the program's amazing. But there's one person I have to ask you about,
Okay.
and it's one of the most amazing. This can be the end. I could go on for hours with you, but this one person has been a part of the program for a long time, and consistency, transparency, work ethic, and that's Fikre
Oh,
Wondafrash. Yeah.
oh yeah.
So for the world, if they don't know, the trainer for long track is a gentleman named Fikre. He's a friend of mine. Coming into short track and kind of taking my role right before Olympic trials, before that Marquette event, right before Vancouver was a challenging time for me. It was a new experience, and he was so nice and a mentor to me. But being up in Calgary for World Cup 4 last week, again, he's there, but getting to work with him on his athletes. What can you tell me about his role and him as a person, and how, you know, the trainer has a role with the team? There's many people that are involved, but what can you tell me about Fikre?
Oh, well, first of all, they broke the mold when they made him, you know. I, I guess, you know, to start off, like I pride myself on the fact that, you know, when Fikre came into the program in the fall of 2004,
Yeah.
I was already 2.5 years in as head coach. And I knew that in the past, it always struck me as weird that our trainers had a short shelf life. If they made it 4 years through an Olympic quad, that was long.
Hmm.
A lot of times they struggle to keep trainers on because it's, as you know, it's a very, very demanding position. It's a thankless job. Um, you're part sports psychologist. You know, the majority of your time is treating problems. So, and a lot of times you don't get the respect or the recognition that you deserve. And so for me, like coming in and working with Fikre, immediately, you know, we gelled right off the bat. And my goal was to keep him long term, you know.
Yeah.
And so starting his, you know, 18th season with US Speedskating is something that, you know, he
Man.
should be proud of. I'm proud of because that's something that's never been done, at least in US Speedskating. He
I'm proud of
definitely
him.
he definitely isn't afraid to work hard. He has a very mellow, even keel
Hmm.
personality, which athletes need, because typically the coaches are the dominant, the strong presence, and sometimes the athletes feel like they can't talk to the coaches. So when they're getting treatment on the table, you guys become the confidants, and
Hmm.
Fikre can take a lot of times the emotion out of it and just talk to them as, again, a friend and a confidant. Whereas for me in a coaching role, sometimes I don't get that luxury. I have to be upfront. I have to be very direct, um, because that's what's required. So he's definitely learned what the sport requires. And a lot of times, trainers, uh, when they go through their education in their schools, they think it's going to be like, oh, fun, work with teams, work with athletes, see them develop. But a lot of times that's not what it ends up working out. The hours, when you're in the competition season, there's no day off, as you know. And you could get called up 3 o'clock in the morning. Hey, I have a fever, I'm throwing up, and we
Yeah.
got to be on the bus in 3 hours to travel 15 hours on a flight, to another country or back home or whatever. So the medical staff, which you're, again, firsthand, has an undaunting task of keeping the athletes, uh, you know, going to the starting line.
Yeah.
I couldn't do my job properly without you guys. And like they said in the movie Concussion, right? The trainers are, where the rubber meets the road. They're not just knee wrappers and ankle wrappers, right?
Yep.
You guys keep the athletes in training and in competition. And one of my former mentors, he always said, like, if I'm not pushing the athletes hard enough to where they're needing you guys, they're not training hard enough. With that comes a balance, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
obviously I don't want them in a state of injury, but you guys do a great job, and Fikre is really good at communicating with me, like, hey, we might have to make an adjustment here and there because so and so is experiencing this, or
Yeah.
they might be redlining and we have to pull them back and so forth. So his intuition is awesome that way. And he's got some of the best hands I've ever worked with, like from a massage therapy standpoint. A lot of people don't realize, like, trainers, like, I don't know why in athletic training in the school they don't put that as a part of the program, because I don't know of any sport that doesn't benefit from recovery massage and flushes and stuff like that. It boggles my mind. And
Yeah.
the fact that he has tremendous massage therapy skills is just because that's probably over 50% of the job.
Yep.
He's one of the best in the world that
Yep.
I've ever experienced.
No, his personality, like you said, he's so even keeled, no drama.
Right.
He's funny. Um, it's a safe space for the athletes, but from a technical standpoint, just solid. And it's neat to see him with his experience, how he understands speed skating. Obviously, it's through you and everyone else involved, but I mean, he's all in, and he's meant a lot to me. He's a good friend, and it was nice to see him. But thank you for saying such nice words about him, because it's not that the trainers don't get attention, but it's a lot of work. And most people, when they ask me, they'll text, "What are you doing?" And it's like, you're always on. You
Yeah.
always have to be available, and you can't die. You can't be too high. You have to kind of just ride the wave and be there for the athlete and communicate well with the coach, and the coaches, and he does that. So
Yeah, I mean, I always
yeah.
commended you guys, because to me, it's like I never looked at it as a hierarchy. I always felt like, the medical staff and the coaching staff worked in line. It wasn't like here and there. It was in line because, a lot of times you guys are the first ones there and you guys are the last ones to leave, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And just like the coaches, you're gonna have to deal with every athlete on that day, whether or not they had a great race, a mediocre race, or a really bad race. You ride the wave of the emotions of every athlete that you're treating that day. So I know you guys know what the coaching staff goes through, and I can feel what you guys go through.
Mhm.
So it's more so that, you know you guys are the unsung heroes, because you guys never operate in the foreground. you're always behind the scenes, and again, don't get the recognition that you well deserve, because again, you're the ones that keep the athletes you know back in the game, training and racing. My job is to break them down and make them better, but I don't put them back together. You guys put them back together.
Yeah, but it's a collaboration, and I look at you're in charge, and just support you and support the athlete
Yeah.
equally, and just communicate as clearly as you can. And I've always appreciated how you treated me, and thank you for letting me be involved with the team right before the Olympics. It was awesome to see everyone gear up for the games, and I do wish you guys the best in China.
Well, appreciate it, Eric. You've always been top shelf in my book since day one. I felt like in a lot of ways you're very similar to Fikre from a personality standpoint, a work ethic, the understanding, and I wish we could have you full time. Because you bring a lot to the table, and the skaters owe you a lot as well.
Well, I'm always available, and your skaters are always they say thank you, and you say thank you. So it's we hear it a lot, and no,
Well,
I'm just
that's good, because I always
yeah,
tell the athletes, don't make the trainer's job harder than it already is. They have to make sure that, like, oh, I'm gonna get treatment. I'm like, well, you still got to warm down. You still got to do your
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Just because you're getting treatment later doesn't mean you get to neglect that other stuff. So,
Well, I'm always available if you got this. If you guys need anything, and the athletes, when I talk to them, we don't create division. We're just
right,
there to be part of the family, and but if they ever need anything,
absolutely,
happy to be a part of the solution. And
appreciate it, brother.
yeah,
Appreciate it.
I wish you a great trip. And we didn't mention really your heart attack in 2009, in late 2019, and you look great, and I hope
Thank
you
you.
feel well. And I wish you nothing but the best. And I'll be
Thank you,
rooting
brother.
for you. Okay,
Appreciate
thanks,
it.
man.
All
Bye,
right.
Ryan.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.
See you.